Tobias Kinley walked into Harvard's elite lecture hall, not with privilege, but with purpose. They laughed when he took the center seat. They whispered diversity hire when he opened his notebook. But when he solved a 50-year-old unsolvable math problem in under a minute, the room froze. And just as the silence settled, someone whispered, "He must have cheated." Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The morning sun hadn't yet burned through the autumn mist that wrapped around Harvard's ancient red brick buildings. Fresh leaves crunched under Tobias Kinley's sneakers as he crossed the courtyard alone. He carried no backpack, just a single worn notebook under his arm. The notebook's edges were frayed, its cover creased by years of use, but it held pages full of equations, scribbles, and dreams. Dreams he refused to let anyone rewrite. Tobias's heart thudded with a rhythm he had trained himself to ignore. This was the moment, day one of classes at Harvard, a campus few from his Chicago neighborhood ever visited, let alone stepped into as students. But Tobias wasn't raised to walk with fear. His mother, Regina, made sure of that. "Speak like you own every room, Toby," she had said that morning over the phone. "Because you do. You earned this." He nodded silently at the memory, even as his eyes caught the tall, polished wooden doors of Jefferson Hall. He knew exactly what waited behind them. Not just students, but stairs. Not just a lecture, but a battlefield of assumptions. Inside the lecture hall, the air shifted the moment Tobias entered. Conversations dimmed. A few students turned to glance. Others stared outright. They weren't discreet. They didn't need to be. Their privilege shielded them from shame. He walked past rows of designer backpacks and silver laptops, his shoulders squared. Every movement of his Nike hoodie and clean, ironed jeans was scanned like it didn't belong. Tobias didn't flinch. A white boy in the second row, with perfectly gelled hair and a Rolex glinting on his wrist, leaned toward his friend and muttered, "Admissions must have been feeling generous." Laughter. Quick, soft but intentional. Tobias caught it. He chose the center row, the dead center seat. He wanted no shadow to hide in. This was calculus 2, a prerequisite that weeded out the week before midterms. He had studied the course outline months ago. Every formula in it he had already mastered. As he sat, a girl to his left pulled her bag closer to her feet, like she was afraid it might disappear. Tobias didn't look at her. He didn't need to. The professor walked in moments later. Dr. Nathaniel Marrow, thin-rimmed glasses, silver beard, and the air of someone who rarely blinked. The man didn't say hello. Instead, he reached into his bag, walked to the board, and uncapped a marker. "I'll start with a puzzle," he announced. "This problem has existed since 1974. No one here will solve it. Don't try. It's just a welcome to Harvard." Laughter again, this time from the front row. Dr. Marrow turned and wrote a long equation across the board. As the symbols and exponents curved into complex formations, students leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Tobias leaned back. He had seen that equation before, late one night on a blog meant for advanced number theorists. At the time, he hadn't understood why no one solved it. To him, it looked like a poorly disguised variation of a theorem he'd cracked by the age of 16. But no one at Harvard knew that. To them, Tobias was just a quota admission, a scholarship kid who didn't belong. When the professor stepped away from the board, arms crossed in arrogant satisfaction, the room fell into silence. He glanced around theatrically. "This problem," he said, "was once attempted by a Nobel laureate. Don't hurt yourselves trying. It's beyond all of you." The room chuckled again, but not Tobias. He was watching the equation, not like a student, but like a predator studying prey. And then slowly, without asking, without even standing, he pulled out a pen. The girl beside him blinked. "You're not seriously." Tobias stood, not with aggression, not with arrogance, with intent. He walked slowly, calmly down the aisle. The room fell into murmurs. "Is he? He's not actually. Somebody tell him it's a joke." Dr. Marrow's eyebrows lifted slightly as Tobias approached the whiteboard. "What's your name?" the professor asked, sounding more amused than curious. "Tobias Kinley," he said, uncapping the marker. "And I've seen this before." Dr. Marrow scoffed, stepping aside. "Be my guest." Now all eyes were on him. Phones were being raised. Someone whispered, "This is going to be embarrassing." But Tobias didn't hear any of it. He didn't even see the classroom anymore. All he saw was the rhythm of numbers in his mind. symmetrical, logical, beautiful. He started writing. Not guessing, not hesitating. Every stroke of his marker flowed with conviction. No pauses, no erasing. The entire room had fallen into complete silence, the kind of silence that didn't breathe. 1 minute. That's all it took. 60 seconds and Tobias stepped back, clicked the marker shut, and handed it to Dr. Marrow. The professor stared at the board, then closer, then again, his mouth opened slightly, then shut. Because it was correct. Every line, every derivation. Clean, efficient, elegant. No one said a word. Tobias turned back toward the rows of students, most of whom now looked like they had seen a ghost. Some were still holding their phones, mid-record. But it wasn't awe in their eyes. It was disbelief. And something uglier, resentment. Tobias walked back to his seat, quietly. He didn't smile, didn't nod, just sat back down and opened his notebook. For a moment there was nothing but stillness. Then from the back, a voice said low but loud enough. He must have cheated. A professor challenges the class with a legendary math problem that hasn't been solved in 50 years. Tobias smirks. The silence following Tobias's 1-minute miracle didn't last long, even as the impossible equation remained on the board. A quiet monument to his brilliance. The atmosphere in the lecture hall thickened with something sour. It wasn't amazement that spread through the room, but discomfort. Not awe, but suspicion. He hadn't just answered a problem. He'd broken a quiet, unspoken rule. Know your place. In that prestigious classroom, where names like Carter, Ashford, and Lennox sat embossed on leather notebooks. Brilliance was expected, but only in certain colors. Tobias's presence disrupted a legacy older than any equation. As he slid back into his chair pretending to take notes, Tobias felt it. The shift. The tension in the air wasn't envy. It was threat. Behind him, 2 boys in pastel polos leaned toward each other, whispering. Their eyes weren't on the board. They were on him. Check this, one said under his breath, tapping his phone. Within seconds, a group chat named H-Gen Royals, an unofficial circle of Harvard legacy students, some tied to Supreme Court justices, others to billion-dollar donors, began lighting up with messages. Cameron A. Who the hell is this kid? Lucas W. Urban accent. Discount hoodie. You already know. Eliza M. Diversity hire. Harvard loves a charity case. Bryce R. What if he actually solved it? Lucas. Doesn't matter. No way it's original. Watch. This'll blow up. Tobias didn't see the messages. Not yet. But he felt their weight. The quiet snickers. The sideways glances. The suppressed smirks. It wasn't just student judgment. It was strategy. His success didn't inspire respect. It triggered retaliation. Dr. Marrow, still standing beside the whiteboard, stared blankly at Tobias's solution, as if questioning his own syllabus. He hadn't commented yet, hadn't even acknowledged it publicly. That said everything. Instead, the professor finally turned, adjusted his glasses, and spoke. Well, he muttered, his voice lacking the usual arrogance. That was interesting. He erased the board with slow, deliberate strokes, like he was wiping away a threat. Then he turned back to the class. I suppose we'll begin with foundational principles. Set theory, proof logic, concepts, I assume most of you already understand. His eyes paused on Tobias for a second too long. The implication hung heavy. Already understand most of you. Tobias didn't blink. He just kept his pen moving. As Dr. Marrow shifted into lecture mode, explaining functions and logic trees, Tobias noticed something else. Every time the professor asked a rhetorical question, his eyes would glance toward Tobias, not invitingly, but cautiously, like he was waiting for him to trip. The students picked up on it too. The white boy across the aisle leaned into his laptop, pretending to take notes while recording a blurry video of Tobias. Another girl behind him typed furiously, updating a student-run gossip forum called Crimson Unfiltered. A new post appeared within minutes. Thread title Math Whiz or Cheater. Harvard freshman solves legendary equation day 1. User H Legacy. So, there's a freshman named Tobias Kinley. Yes, seriously. Who just solved the unsolvable equation in Marrow's class. Not even joking. In front of everyone. Wild. But who walks in on day 1 and magically cracks a 50-year-old problem? Something smells off. Anyone know his background? The replies came fast. Eliza, Chicago. Public school. Say less.
Kamath. Guarantee you he's here on an equity quota.
Legacy facts. No legacy, no pedigree, no shot he's that smart. It took less than 20 minutes for an entire narrative to form. One Tobias hadn't spoken a single word to defend himself against. He hadn't even introduced himself yet. But Harvard's elite had already filed him into a box, labeled, sealed. Meanwhile, even the faculty weren't immune to bias. However unconscious. After class, as students filtered out, a TA, a middle-aged woman with a stiff smile and pearls, approached Tobias. "That was impressive," she said, emphasizing the last word like it hurt her to say it. "Do you need help accessing tutoring resources? Sometimes students from under-supported schools struggle early on." Tobias tilted his head slightly. "You mean public schools?" She smiled tighter. "Just let us know if it gets overwhelming." Tobias nodded slowly. "Sure, I'll reach out. If I get confused solving another problem no one else can." Her face twitched. She turned and walked off. Later that evening, alone in his dorm, Tobias sat with his notebook open but untouched. He wasn't reviewing equations. He was replaying every look, every laugh, every pause. Harvard wasn't about learning. It was about proving you belonged. Every single minute, a notification lit up his phone. He'd been tagged in a post. His name, full name, was now trending in one of the student forums. He clicked. Diversity trophy or hidden genius. There were photos. Someone had snapped a blurry shot of him at the board. Others were zoomed-in screen grabs from his Facebook profile. The captions weren't flattering. 8 Crimson Elite. Harvard's got another charity case. Pray for the curve.
A Harv T spell.
Let's not act like he's the first student to copy a solution from Reddit. A legit legacy. I feel bad for him. They always burn out by semester 2. Tobias felt the heat rise in his chest. Not anger, not fear.
Rage, cold, quiet, unshakable.
He clicked to close the window. Then he turned to a clean page in his notebook. If Harvard wanted to test him, fine. But they weren't ready for the answers he already carried. The next morning arrived like a storm. Tobias entered the same classroom, same seat, same notebook. But this time, when he sat down, something was different. A folded paper sat on his desk. He opened it slowly. In thick black ink, the words, "You're not special. Stay in your lane." His eyes didn't flinch. But inside, something cracked. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the message Harvard's system sent to every black student who dared to be extraordinary. He folded the paper back up and slipped it into his notebook, right between his notes on unsolvable problems and perfect solutions. At the front, Dr. Marrow had once again written the impossible equation on the board, pretending it hadn't been solved the day before. He smiled thinly. "This week," he announced, "anyone who can solve this will receive an automatic A in the course." It's a theoretical challenge, not to be taken seriously. The class chuckled, eager to pretend yesterday hadn't happened. Tobias didn't laugh. He stood, walked down the aisle again, and picked up the marker. The room gasped, louder this time. Tobias walks to the board and picks up the marker. As the whole room gasps, the marker in Tobias Kinley's hand felt colder than it had yesterday. The air in the lecture hall was somehow sharper, tighter, like the room itself was resisting his presence. His steps echoed softer this time, and every click of his sneakers across the tile floor came with amplified scrutiny. Dr. Marrow stood beside the whiteboard again, arms crossed, his gaze unreadable. He didn't stop Tobias. He didn't say a word. Neither did the students. They just watched. Phones were already pointed his way. Someone hit record. Someone else whispered. Again? With disbelief curling off the word like steam from a burn. But Tobias didn't flinch. He studied the equation again, the exact one he'd solved yesterday. Line by line, it sat on the board like a dare. Same problem, same ignorance pretending it hadn't been cracked wide open. Only now, it came with stakes. Dr. Marrow had attached a prize to it, an automatic A, but only after erasing Tobias's first solution. That erasure hadn't been about academic integrity. It had been about reclaiming power, reclaiming the narrative. But Tobias wasn't here to play pretend. He uncapped the marker, took one breath, and then he moved. His hand glided across the board like it had its own mind. No hesitations, no second guessing. Each symbol flowed into the next with surgical precision. It was poetry in motion, mathematical ballet. Every line aligned, folded, evolved. like the equation was surrendering to him. Behind him, chairs squeaked as students leaned forward, eyes widening. Whispered disbelief began to rise. But it died just as quickly as it started. Something about the way Tobias moved, the way he commanded the problem, it forced silence. Even Dr. Marrow's hands fell from his chest. Tobias worked in rhythm, his breathing steady. In his mind, the numbers weren't static. They danced. They pulsed. This wasn't just a solution. This was a dismantling of every assumption, every stereotype, every snicker. He wasn't just solving the problem again. He was forcing them all to watch him do it again. Exactly 60 seconds. He capped the marker, turned, and faced them. Silent. Absolute. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The proof glared behind him, undeniable. Then, slowly, Dr. Marrow walked toward the board. His mouth parted, then pressed shut. He lifted his glasses with one finger, studied Tobias's work, traced it with his eyes. His silence grew heavier with every passing second. Then, a slight nod. Barely perceptible. But there, he turned to the class, opened his mouth, and then, from the back row, a voice sliced through the quiet. He must have cheated. 3 words. Cold, sharp, intentional. It came from Lucas Whitmore, a third-generation Harvard legacy, whose family name decorated a university auditorium. Blonde, sun-kissed, and smug, he leaned back in his chair like he'd just cracked a case. Tobias didn't move. But the room did. The spell broke. Eyes snapped to Lucas, then back to Tobias. The silence splintered into whispers, giggles, quiet murmurs of confirmation, because Lucas had said what many were already thinking. How could he have done it again? Why didn't the professor stop him? What if this kid was playing them? Dr. Marrow turned slowly toward Lucas. His voice, when it came, was measured. Cheated? You're accusing a peer of academic dishonesty, Mr. Whitmore? Lucas didn't blink. I'm saying it's statistically improbable for someone to replicate that solution, especially someone who doesn't even have a research background. The emphasis on someone was razor sharp. Tobias's jaw tightened. Dr. Marrow looked between them. For a moment it seemed he might defend Tobias outright, but instead he cleared his throat. The solution appears correct. Again, he muttered. But given the sensitivity, I'll be reviewing it with the department head. Privately. Gasps. Murmurs. Privately. A coded word at Harvard. It meant behind closed doors. It meant silence before truth. It meant reputation before justice. Tobias looked down at his notebook. The folded note from earlier still sat inside it. You're not special. Stay in your lane. This was the lane they'd designed. One where even excellence could be framed as dishonesty if the skin delivering it didn't fit the mold. As class ended, students rushed to exit. Some stared. Others laughed. But most avoided looking him in the eye, because it was easier to pretend Tobias Kinley was a fluke than accept that he might be the smartest person in the room. Outside the hall, Lucas and his friends huddled, grinning. He got lucky. It's not genius, it's memory, Lucas sneered. But he found the solution online. One girl in their group, Eliza, glanced at Tobias from a distance. Her brows furrowed, not out of empathy, but confusion. The math didn't add up, and that unsettled her more than any scandal. Back inside, Tobias remained seated, alone, until the TA approached again, this time with less of a smile.
You're making waves,
She said, just be careful. Some students, they don't like being made to feel small. Tobias looked up. You mean they don't like when someone beats them? She paused, then whispered, they don't like when someone like you does. He closed his notebook slowly. Then maybe they should study more. As he walked out, the whispers followed. But so did the footage. Someone had posted the entire moment, Tobias solving the equation again, on TikTok. The clip had been captioned, Black freshman destroys Harvard's hardest problem in 60 seconds. Again, the views were climbing. 20,000. Then 80,000. Then 400,000. But under the video, the top comment read, no way this is real. Where's the proof? He definitely cheated. Tobias walked back to his dorm that evening with the same notebook under his arm. But as he passed the bulletin board near the common area, something caught his eye. A flyer torn at the edges had his face on it. Someone had printed a screenshot from the TikTok video and written in thick red marker over it. Fake. Fraud. Toad-in. His heart thudded once. Hard. He tore the paper down. But the damage was already done. It wasn't about flyers. It was about framing. The real problem wasn't on the board anymore. It was in the walls. In the shadows. In the systems built to whisper that black brilliance is always borrowed, never owned. As he reached his room, Tobias closed the door, locked it, and finally let his shoulders sag. But just as he sat down, his phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a comment. It was a DM. Unknown sender. You think that was smart? We'll see how smart you are when the dean hears what you did. Instead of applause, one student whispers, "He must have cheated." The silence after Tobias's second perfect solution didn't feel like victory. It felt like isolation wrapped in ice. His proof still lingered behind him, on the board, untouched, flawless. Yet not a single hand clapped, not one professor publicly praised him, no student leaned over to say good job. Instead, eyes darted, lips curled, and suspicions bloomed, like rot under polished marble. Tobias had performed academic magic, twice. But Harvard, cloaked in its centuries of elite decorum, responded not with celebration but scrutiny. As class ended, Dr. Marrow didn't speak to Tobias. He simply looked once at the board, exhaled slowly, and turned to erase it. Again, the markers screeched against the surface, as if they too resented the brilliance written by someone they didn't expect. The students filed out in clumps, muttering. Not about the problem, but about the problem with the problem. Tobias. I heard he's some math prodigy from the hood. One girl whispered near the hallway. Prodigy, or plagiarist. A guy countered, come on, that stuff's online somewhere. Has to be. Their voices trailed into a stream of theories. None of them started with possibility. None with fairness. All began at doubt, because that was easier to accept than a black kid rewriting Harvard's expectations. Back in his dorm, Tobias sat on his bed with the same notebook resting on his lap. He hadn't turned a page since that second class. His fingers hovered over the corners but didn't flip them. Because right now, math wasn't his problem. People were. His roommate, Jordan, a white freshman from Boston who rarely spoke, peeked in from the bathroom. Hey, he said hesitantly. Saw the video. Tobias didn't look up. You were trending, Jordan added. Even my brother texted me, said you fried that whole class. Still nothing. Dude, Jordan continued. Awkwardly, you okay? Tobias finally lifted his eyes. Would you be? Jordan rubbed the back of his neck, unsure. I guess I thought it'd be, I don't know, awesome? To go viral for something smart. Tobias nodded slowly. It is. Until they call it fake. Just then his phone buzzed again. Another message. This time, from a student-run newsletter editor. Hey Tobias, can you verify you really solved the equation? We've received tips that it might have been staged. Want to give your side? Tips. Staged. Tobias stared at the words like they were dripping with poison. His side? There had never been space for his side. Not since the first step into that cold lecture hall. An hour later, he received an email from the math department. Short. Sanitized. Insincere. Thank you for your demonstration today. Due to the complexity of the solution and current academic protocol, a formal verification process will begin. Please refrain from discussing the problem publicly until a full review is complete. No congratulations. No we're impressed. No this is historic. Just don't talk. He leaned back in his chair, biting the inside of his cheek, until he tasted blood. Harvard wasn't denying him directly. That would be obvious. But it was doing something worse, shrinking his brilliance into a problem to manage. And that's when it clicked. The racism wasn't in the curriculum. It wasn't in the grades. It wasn't even in the rules. It was in the reactions. Reactions that questioned, avoided, erased. The next day, nothing had changed. Dr. Marrow began class with no mention of Tobias's solution. No acknowledgement that one of the most famous equations in modern mathematical history had just been solved by a freshman twice. Instead, he launched into a lecture on proof theory, as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. Tobias sat in the same seat, same notebook, eyes forward, but everything felt different. Every few minutes, someone in the class would glance at him, not with admiration, but with quiet calculation, like they were waiting for him to make a mistake. Something they could write off as proof he wasn't as smart as the moment he'd created. After class, he approached the board as Dr. Marrow was gathering his materials. Is my solution being reviewed? He asked plainly. Marrow didn't look up. It's with the committee. Tobias waited. Was it correct? The professor finally looked at him, and for the first time, There was no smugness in his face, just a trace of something that almost resembled fear. It appears to be, he admitted. Then why isn't that being shared? Dr. Marrow hesitated. Because, Tobias, sometimes making noise too early invites scrutiny, and scrutiny distracts from progress. Tobias blinked. You mean your progress? The professor's silence was answer enough. Tobias walked out without another word. By dinner the campus had moved on to other stories, but Tobias hadn't. Neither had the whispers. Neither had the posts. One thread on a private Discord server, run by upperclassmen titled, "The New Affirmative Action Poster Boy. Harvard just gifted him his 15 minutes. Let's hope he doesn't try to extend it." Notice how they're calling him a genius but not listing his background. Wonder why. Wouldn't be shocked if it's another fake like that. Notre Dame hoax kid from 20. The more he succeeded, the more they tried to shrink him. At 11:47 p.m., as he was finally getting ready for bed, Tobias heard a soft sound, the rustle of paper under his door. He froze, waited, then stood and walked slowly over. The hallway was empty. He bent down and picked up the note. Thick paper. Black ink. 6 words, written in tight, jagged handwriting. You don't belong here. Stay in your lane. His throat clenched. He walked back, closed the door gently, and locked it. Then he sat back down, unfolded the note again, and stared.
No threats. No profanity.
Just positioning. Stay small. Stay silent. Stay in your place. He folded the note once, twice, slid it between the pages of his notebook, right behind the solution they'd erased. Then he opened a blank page and wrote one line across the top. The real math is in the silence. Later that night, Tobias finds a note slipped under his dorm door. You don't belong here. Stay in your lane. The note was still in Tobias's notebook the next morning, folded neatly, tucked behind the solution they refused to acknowledge. You don't belong here. Stay in your lane. He didn't show it to anyone. What would be the point? It hadn't threatened him outright. It hadn't used slurs. But its meaning was louder than violence. That's how Harvard racism worked. Whispered, polished, academic, enough to make you doubt yourself, but never loud enough to quote. And in the days that followed, it escalated. Quietly. It started with eyes. Longer, colder stares in hallways. Classmates who used to nod now turned their heads. Study groups disbanded without telling him. One professor even forgot to email him a materials list for an upcoming lab. The most obvious shift came in the dorms. He returned from class on Thursday to find his door slightly ajar. At first it didn't register. He had locked it that morning. Always did. His gut tightened. He stepped inside slowly.
The air felt different. Ugh.
Everything looked untouched, until he turned toward his desk. His notebook, the one he carried everywhere, had been taken from his bag and placed squarely on the desk. Opened, pages ruffled. On the inside cover, someone had drawn a thick red line through his name. Underneath, they'd written in sharp pencil, "Show off, shut down." No sign of forced entry. No broken locks. Just quiet violation. He stood still for several minutes, staring at the graphite message like it might rewrite itself. Then, without a word, he closed the notebook, packed it away, and sat on his bed. When his roommate Jordan walked in later, Tobias didn't mention it. He didn't want the concern. Or worse, the denial. Instead, he pulled out his laptop, opened his problem set, and forced his focus back onto equations. But focus doesn't sit well on top of fear. That night, while scrolling through student podcast lists for background noise, Tobias came across a new upload from the Crimson Lens, one of the more popular, slickly produced student-led shows. The episode title stopped him, Confidence or Arrogance. When smart becomes smug. He clicked play. Within seconds, he heard a voice he recognized. Lucas Whitmore. Calm, smooth, confident. I think there's a difference between being smart, Lucas said, and acting like you're the only smart person in the room. That kind of energy turns academic spaces toxic, especially when it's someone new, someone who didn't earn it the same way we did. The host laughed. Are you referring to the recent math class incident? I'm just saying, Lucas replied, that Harvard's supposed to be collaborative, not performative. And when someone constantly needs to prove they're better, that's not brilliance, that's insecurity. No names, just enough subtext to leave no doubt. Tobias paused the podcast, let the silence hang, then he shut the laptop, and sat in the dark. No one from admin had checked in. No professors had followed up. Not about the note. Not about the podcast. Not about anything. But when Tobias finally emailed campus security about the message left in his room, the response came within the hour. Polite. Clinical. We take student concerns seriously. Please confirm whether you may have mistakenly left your door unsecured. Due to the absence of physical damage or specific threats, this incident does not meet the threshold for formal investigation. No follow-up questions. No offer to speak. He stared at the words, rereading. May have mistakenly left your door unsecured. The implication was clear. Maybe this is your fault. Frustration burned in his chest. Not hot, cold. The kind that sinks deep, heavy. By Friday, Tobias couldn't walk across campus without feeling the weight of eyes. It wasn't just about the math anymore. It was about how he'd made them feel. Uncomfortable. Unchallenged. Exposed. And that kind of discomfort, at Harvard, got handled quietly. The tipping point came in the dining hall. He was halfway through his lunch, sitting alone as usual, when a girl from his calculus class, Eliza, passed his table. She slowed for a second, hesitated, and then said, I heard the department's re-evaluating that problem. Tobias looked up. Eliza didn't sit, just stood there, holding her tray. I mean, they're trying to figure out how you solved it so fast. She added. Some people are saying you had outside help. Tobias tilted his head. Do you believe that? She blinked. I mean, I don't know. It's impressive. But it just happened so fast. And you haven't, published anything before, right? Neither have most freshmen, Tobias replied. She nodded. Awkward. Right. Yeah. I was just curious. Then she walked off. Curious. That's what they called it. Later that afternoon, Tobias received an email from the Office of Student Conduct. The subject line made his breath stop. Disciplinary notice. Incident report regarding interpersonal conduct. His hands trembled as he opened the message. Inside, a formal letter, dense, bureaucratic, full of legalese. But the core message stood out in bold. Following recent reports concerning verbal exchanges and behavioral disruptions within academic and residential spaces, you are hereby issued a formal warning for inappropriate tone and perceived aggressive conduct during peer and faculty interactions. He read it twice. Then again, aggressive conduct. Not for the note. Not for the vandalism. Not for the podcast smearing his name. But for his tone. For daring to defend himself. For speaking plainly. For not performing humility in a way that made others comfortable. He scrolled to the bottom. There it was. Further incidents may result in academic review or probation. Probation after solving a math problem that hadn't been cracked in decades. The irony was razor sharp. He looked out the window, his reflection faint against the glass. A genius reduced to a threat. A prodigy painted as a problem. He closed the laptop. And for the first time since arriving at Harvard, Tobias felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel. Alone. Tobias receives a disciplinary warning, not for the vandalism, but for aggressive behavior in response. Understood. The warning email sat unread in Tobias's inbox, but its subject line alone had already carved a hollow in his stomach. Disciplinary notice. Incident report regarding interpersonal conduct. The weight of the words didn't hit all at once. It crept in, like the cold, subtle, then suffocating. He stared at it for hours, unable to click. But it didn't matter. By the time the sun fell below the Cambridge skyline, the rumor had outrun the truth. It began with a whisper in the dining hall. A hushed comment dropped over trays of food. Did you hear? That math kid snapped on someone. Threatened him in class. Then a tweet appeared. Vague but damning. We talk about privilege, but what about accountability? Just because you're gifted doesn't mean you're safe to be around. Harvard safety. By the next morning, Tobias's name was no longer trending because of brilliance. It was trending because of a lie. In lecture halls, the air changed when he entered. Conversations dropped mid-sentence. Classmates shifted their bags further onto their laps. In one study session, a white student stood when he sat and moved across the room without explanation. No one said anything directly. They didn't have to. By midweek it was official. A student-led petition titled Ensure Campus Safety Remove Tobias Kinley began circulating. Neatly worded, polite, framed as concern. This is not about race. This is about behavior. We welcome all scholars, but not at the expense of mental security. Tobias Kinley has shown a pattern of aggressive classroom conduct and should be suspended pending investigation. A link to the petition appeared on Reddit, Twitter, and a private Facebook group, for Harvard legacy students. Within 24 hours, it had over 700 signatures, many from people Tobias had never met. He scrolled through the names. Some were familiar, some weren't, but each one felt like a wound. Even worse was the silence. He checked the page for the Black Student Alliance. No statement, no comment, no repost of the truth. When he reached out to a student leader he vaguely knew from orientation, her reply was short. "We support you, but this is complicated. The administration is watching us. We have to be careful how we move." Careful. The word felt like a betrayal wrapped in strategy. That night, Jordan, his roommate, knocked lightly on Tobias's door before stepping in. He looked nervous, hesitant. "I gotta tell you something," he said. Tobias nodded. "Some guy from one of the campus podcasts DM'd me. Said they're doing a piece on you. Asked if you'd ever snapped at anyone. Wanted me to go on record." Tobias blinked. "What'd you say?" Jordan raised both hands. "I shut it down. Told them no way. You've been nothing but quiet since you got here. Just figured you should know." Tobias exhaled slowly. "They're trying to build a narrative." Jordan's face tightened. "They already are." The next day, the official email arrived. "You are required to appear before the Committee on Student Conduct to address allegations of hostile academic behavior and verbal threats." The hearing was set for Friday. Tobias was told to bring documentation, remain respectful, and arrive on time. They didn't ask for his side. They didn't clarify the charges. Just show up. Defend yourself. He spent the next 2 nights preparing. He printed out the hate note from his dorm, screenshotted podcast comments, and tweets that suggested a coordinated smear, compiled timestamps showing he hadn't even spoken to Lucas or any classmates the day of the alleged threat. No one had seen him raise his voice. No one had been in danger. But the absence of evidence didn't stop the machine. On the morning of the hearing, Tobias wore a dark sweater and slacks. He didn't dress to impress. He dressed to be taken seriously. His mother texted him at 6. "You were born with truth, son. Stand in it." He stared at her message longer than any of his notes. The hearing room was colder than he expected, a long rectangular space lined with gray carpet and floor-length windows. A wooden table stretched across the front, behind which sat 5 people, 2 senior faculty members, 1 administrator, a graduate student representative, and the faculty chair. Tobias recognized none of them, until the chair looked up. Dr. Nathaniel Marrow, the same professor who had erased Tobias's solution from the board. The one who never acknowledged his genius. The man who told him scrutiny distracts from progress. The blood drained from Tobias's face. Of course it was him. The panel began. The charges were read carefully, vaguely. Multiple students expressed discomfort with Mr. Kinley's demeanor during lectures. Concerns were raised about intimidating verbal tone. One report mentioned an interaction perceived as threatening. Perceived. Tobias spoke when permitted. Calm, clear, unshaking. He explained that he hadn't spoken to any student in that class outside the required coursework. That there had been no confrontation, no threat. He presented his documentation, each page a quiet scream against the lie. Some members nodded politely. Others barely looked up. Dr. Marrow didn't speak at all. Until the end. "Mr. Kinley," he said, leaning forward. "Harvard is a rigorous environment, both intellectually and socially, and sometimes the way we carry brilliance affects those around us. I encourage you to consider how your presence is perceived." Tobias stared at him. "You're not judging me on what I did," he said quietly. "You're judging me on how my existence makes other people feel." Marrow didn't respond. The hearing adjourned. As Tobias stepped out into the hallway, students walking by glanced through the glass door, some curious, some smug, most indifferent. He stood alone in the echo of it all. Behind him, the door to the hearing room clicked shut. The faculty chair at the hearing is the same professor who withheld praise for solving the impossible equation. The door to the hearing room had barely clicked shut before Tobias felt the aftershock rumble through him. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. The room hadn't been a place of truth. It had been a formality, and the moment he saw Dr. Marrow presiding over the hearing, he understood the outcome had been scripted before he ever spoke. Back in his dorm, Tobias sat silently, the overhead light washing the room in sterile brightness. His inbox blinked with unread campus alerts and hollow apologies from classmates who heard what happened. Not one of them offered help. Not one said they believed him. Then at 9:47 p.m., a new email appeared. No subject line, no sender, just a single attachment, audio.zip. Beneath it a one-line message. Play this before they bury you too. His fingers hovered over the trackpad. Every warning sign flashed in his mind. It could be a setup, a virus, a trap, but something deeper instinct, maybe, told him this was different. He opened the file. There were 2 short clips. He pressed play on the first. Laughter filled his headphones, muffled slightly by dorm walls. Voices, familiar ones, echoed through the static. Lucas, Eliza, a third he didn't recognize. Harvard's got a poster boy now, one voice said. Yeah, and he's not even subtle about it, another chimed in. Then a quieter voice. I'm just saying, we can't let him shine. He makes us all look bad. Tobias sat still. The second clip rolled without prompting. So we say he was hostile. Like uncomfortable. You don't have to lie, just stretch it. Someone whispered. Another voice laughed. They'll believe it. It's Harvard, they always believe it. He paused the file. His hands trembled slightly. He wasn't imagining it. He wasn't being paranoid. They had coordinated it. The whole smear. The hearing, the whispers. It was a plan. Now he had proof. But the danger was real. If he used it, he risked more than academic backlash. Harvard had policies against unauthorized recordings, even if he hadn't made them himself. He could be punished for possession alone. He paced the room, heart hammering. Jordan entered a few minutes later, watching him nervously. Tobias explained, voice low, cautious. Jordan sat, silent at first, then said, you have to leak it, but not in your name, not directly. Send it somewhere it can't be ignored. Tobias hesitated. Even if it backfires. Better than doing nothing, Jordan replied. At least this way, the truth gets out. Tobias nodded. But before he made a move, another message pinged. Anonymous. They've done this before. Search Marcus Denton, 2021 in the Crimson Archives. He did. An old article, buried in the university paper, popped up. A nearly identical case. A black sophomore accused of emotional instability after raising grade concerns. Expelled within weeks. No further coverage. Forgot. It wasn't just him. This was a pattern. Tobias opened a new email window. He addressed it to an investigative columnist at the student paper, attached the recordings, the article, and a typed timeline of the events since day one. The silence, the lies, the fake petition. He didn't sign his name. He just wrote, I'm not the first, but I'm going to be the last, and hit send. The moment the message disappeared, so did the weight in his chest. Outside, midnight bells tolled. Then his phone vibrated. A post from A Crimson Watch was already live. Breaking. Leaked audio suggests Harvard students plotted bias campaign against black math prodigy. Tobias leaned back in his chair, eyes wide. He had just handed the truth to the world, and there was no taking it back. He decides to leak the audio, anonymously, to the campus newspaper. At first, Tobias didn't even know the article had gone live. He'd turned off his notifications, unplugged his laptop, and fallen asleep with the light still on, too emotionally drained to wait for fallout. But Harvard didn't sleep. By morning his phone had 107 unread messages, 6 missed calls, dozens of tagged mentions. And then Jordan burst into the room, breathless, holding up his phone. Dude, you're everywhere. Tobias blinked, still groggy. What? Jordan spun the screen around. The headline blared. Black Harvard student targeted after solving decades-old math problem. Leaked audio sparks outrage. There was no name in the title, but the article's opening paragraph left no doubt. A freshman math prodigy, recently accused of verbal misconduct, was the subject of a racially driven smear campaign, according to anonymous recordings leaked to the Crimson Watch. By noon it had 300. By evening national outlets picked it up. CNN, The Washington Post, BuzzFeed, MSNBC, even The Shade Room. Each told the same story. A black teenager from inner-city Chicago, silenced and nearly expelled for being too brilliant, too unapologetically exceptional. The hashtags exploded. Harvard Truth. Let Tobias speak. Brilliance is not threatening. On Instagram, celebrities reposted screenshots of the article. One tweet by a Pulitzer-winning author simply read, they tried to bury him. He solved what they couldn't, and they called it aggression. Tobias sat in the eye of the storm. His phone vibrated nonstop. Messages pouring in from strangers across the country, students, teachers, activists, kids who saw themselves in him. You give me hope. My son watched your clip and cried. Thank you. They can't silence you now, but not all messages were kind. Under each post came a wave of resistance. Still think he cheated. Affirmative action in action. Media just loves race-baiting genius stories. You don't belong there, kid. You never did. Tobias didn't respond to any of it. He couldn't. Because the university had gone silent.
No official statements. No press releases.
Just internal emails sent to faculty titled "Refrain from public comment on pending student matters." But pressure works differently when it's global. By the second day, student groups across campus began demanding transparency. Black alumni organized an open letter, signed by dozens of former scholars and professors. On the third day, protest formed outside the math building. Hand-painted signs read, "Genius nail threat. Erase racism. Not solution." Ask why they erased his name. Tobias watched it all from his dorm window. He hadn't asked for any of it. He didn't want fame. He wanted fairness. But now, the entire nation was watching Harvard. That night, a private email appeared in his inbox. From an assistant to the president of Harvard University. Subject: confidential, request for meeting. Message: Tobias, President Langley would like to meet with you privately regarding recent events. Please confirm your availability tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. The location will be shared upon confirmation. No explanation. No apology. Just a summons. He stared at the screen, fingers still. This wasn't about an investigation anymore. This was about damage control. He forwarded the message to Jordan. His roommate replied with 3 words: "Play chess now." The next morning, Tobias walked across campus under skies thick with tension. Cameras waited at the edge of the gates. Students followed him with eyes, whispers trailing like smoke. He didn't flinch. He wore the same black sweater, the same shoes from his first day at Harvard. Nothing flashy, nothing soft, just Tobias. A security officer met him near the president's office and guided him through a side entrance. No press. No witnesses. The waiting room was empty. Cold water sat on a tray beside untouched glasses. The door opened 10 minutes later, and a voice called out, "Tobias? Please, come in." Inside sat President Eleanor Langley, silver-haired, sharply dressed, her eyes alert but tired. "Tobias," she said, standing. "Thank you for coming." He nodded once. "I didn't have much of a choice, did I?" Her smile faltered. "You're not in trouble. We want to understand what happened. Directly from you." He sat without being asked. She began the rehearsed speech. The university valued diversity, took all accusations seriously, regretted the recent miscommunications. He let her talk. Then she leaned forward. "We'd like to resolve this matter quickly, quietly, for everyone's benefit." Tobias folded his arms. "Define resolve." She exhaled. "The committee is reviewing the original disciplinary notice. Given the context of the audio, we anticipate it will be cleared. However," she paused, "we'd like you to consider stepping away just for the semester. To focus on yourself. Let the campus cool off." He blinked. "You're asking me to disappear. We're asking you to consider your own safety and the institution's ability to function without disruption." He almost laughed. "I didn't cause the disruption. Your silence did." Langley sat back. Tobias reached into his bag and pulled out 2 documents. One was the hate note slipped under his door. The other was the Crimson article about Marcus Denton, the student expelled 2 years ago for emotional hostility. He slid both across the desk. "I'm not Marcus," he said, "and I'm not going away." The president didn't touch the papers. She simply nodded once. "We'll be in touch," she said. The meeting ended. As Tobias stepped back outside, the cold morning air hit different. This time, he wasn't walking alone. The president of Harvard schedules an urgent, closed-door meeting with Tobias. The glass door of the president's office clicked shut behind Tobias, and it felt like it sealed more than a room. It sealed an entire system. He walked down the quiet corridor, each step echoing against polished tile and centuries of precedent. Outside, the wind bit at his cheeks, but it wasn't the cold that bothered him. It was the language still ringing in his ears. "Consider stepping back. For your safety. For everyone's benefit." They'd called it a temporary withdrawal. He called it what it was, an institutional exile dressed in velvet. By the time Tobias reached his dorm, the university had already sent a follow-up. The subject line was polite: "Resources for personal transition support." The body of the email encouraged him to connect with the Office of Counseling and Wellness. to ensure emotional stability during this challenging time. No mention of injustice. No accountability. Just bureaucracy, disguised as concern. Tobias hovered over the delete button, then moved the message to a folder labeled evidence. His phone buzzed. Jordan. Again. You good? The text read. Tobias didn't answer. The following day, a new wave of subtle isolation rolled in. He walked into his advanced calculus section and found his name removed from the project group's list on the board. A note was posted beside it in soft font. In an effort to maintain a productive classroom environment, groups have been adjusted for balance. The math department soon announced a revised honors initiative, now limited to upperclassmen only. Tobias laughed under his breath, not out of humor, out of clarity. Later in the library, Maya, a quiet senior from another department, slid into the seat across from him. They're not punishing you, she said softly. They're insulating themselves. He didn't look up. That's the same thing. That afternoon he was summoned to another administrative meeting, this time with a legal liaison and a communications officer. They were cordial, professional, smiling. We believe it would be best for all parties, the liaison said, if you considered a brief voluntary break from campus. They slid a confidentiality agreement across the table. It's just a formality. If signed, we can begin clearing the record and providing resources. Tobias stared at it, then slowly pushed it back. I'm not signing silence. The PR officer straightened her blazer. You should know declining this path may complicate the situation. I'm aware, he said. The tone in the room shifted. He stood. You're not protecting me. You're managing optics. That night, Tobias returned to the lecture hall where everything started. It was empty, the chalkboard clean. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. He stepped up to the board and whispered to himself, the real math is in the silence. And for a moment the room felt like a courtroom, not for guilt or innocence, but for truth denial. The next morning, Harvard released its first official statement, a 3-paragraph press release. The university condemns all forms of bias and is committed to a thorough review of recent events involving campus climate. No mention of Tobias. No mention of the audio. No mention of the problem he solved. It was written to say nothing, but sound like something. Jordan found him later, holding his phone like a weapon. An alumni donor's threatening to pull funding, he said, wants discipline restored on campus. There it was. The truth, unfiltered. This wasn't about fairness. It was about fundraising. That afternoon, Tobias received one final email from the dean's office. It read, we are again offering a temporary academic leave, effective immediately. This is entirely optional. However, we strongly encourage you to prioritize safety and stability. He walked into the meeting alone. They repeated the offer, this time with gentler phrasing. Time to breathe. Time to reflect. He listened, and then answered with the clarity of someone who had nothing left to fear. You want me gone so your statement can age well. The dean blinked. That's not. He cut her off. I'll finish the semester. I earned this seat. If my presence disrupts your peace, maybe your peace was built wrong. He left before she could respond. Outside, the first snow had started to fall. It dusted the protest chalk still visible on the quad steps. Around him, students walked past like nothing had changed, as if the storm hadn't touched them. But something had shifted. That night his phone rang. It was his mother. Her voice was shaking before she spoke. Tobias, baby, they came to the house. He froze. What? She was crying now. The garage door, the front, spray paint, symbols. They broke the window. I don't know what to do. He couldn't breathe. His mind raced. Chicago. Their neighborhood. Their street. They found us, Toby, she whispered. What did you do to make them this angry? That night, his mother calls him crying. Their family home was vandalized with hate symbols. Tobias sat motionless, the phone call with his mother still vibrating through his chest. Her voice had cracked mid-sentence, and the sound of glass crunching underfoot echoed behind her. It wasn't just a warning anymore. It was war. They had found their way into his mother's quiet street on the south side, and they hadn't come to argue. They came to scare, not through slurs or screams, through symbols, hate, disguised as silence. The next morning, an email pinged into his inbox from a name he didn't recognize. R.C. Caldwell, at harvardalumni.org. The subject line was polished, invitation, private alumni dialogue, future pathways. The invitation was framed as mentorship, to support your success beyond recent events. Jordan read it over his shoulder and shook his head. That's not support, he muttered. That's strategy. But Tobias went. He had to know what they were willing to say behind closed doors. The meeting was held not on campus, but in a private lounge of a boutique hotel just blocks from Harvard Yard. The room smelled of aged wood and wealth. There were no notepads, no cameras, just soft jazz, and two people already waiting. Richard Caldwell, white hair, navy suit, eyes sharp like glass, a real estate baron, and multi-million-dollar donor. Cynthia Harrington, early 50s, flawless posture, and a sort of calm voice trained for crisis PR. Tobias, Richard greeted, rising. So glad you accepted our little invitation. Cynthia smiled with practiced warmth. We're not here to pressure, just to offer perspective. The conversation started slow. Praise, acknowledgement, sympathy laced with undertones. You're brilliant, Richard said. Truly. We haven't seen this kind of talent since the 90s. Harvard is a family, Cynthia added. And families, when they struggle, don't go to the press. They go to the table. Tobias said nothing. Just listened. Then the offer came. We can help you transition quietly to another Ivy, Richard said. Full ride. Room, board. Your future intact. No press needed. Cynthia leaned in. And a stipend. For wellness. Closure. You deserve peace, Tobias. He blinked. You're asking me to leave? We're asking you to grow, she corrected. Where you can thrive without all this noise. He looked down at his hands. The nails were clean, but his knuckles were tight. And if I stay? Richard didn't flinch. This will escalate. We've seen it before, and legacies last longer when they don't burn bridges. There was no mention of the hate note. No inquiry about his mother. Only risk mitigation. Reputation. Harvard's. Tobias tapped his leg under the table. Not out of nerves, but rhythm. 1, 2, 3. The beat of restraint. What they didn't know. His phone, resting quietly in his pocket, had been recording since the conversation began. He let them talk. He let them outline exactly how institutions bury truth. Not with force, but with finance. Sometimes silence is leadership. Cynthia said. Tobias smiled faintly. Or cowardice. They didn't respond. He thanked them for the opportunity and walked out into the cold. Outside, snow dusted the sidewalk. The world looked undisturbed, but Tobias knew better. Back in his room, he sat on the edge of his bed, headphones in, playing back the conversation. Their voices, smooth, seasoned, offered money like they were offering water. He scrolled through his feed, the protest signs, his mother's broken window, the message clear as day, disappear, or they'll write you out another way. Jordan burst in. They called me, he said. They offered to pay off my housing balance if I stopped engaging in the narrative. Tobias stared. So they're cleaning house. Jordan nodded. What are you gonna do? Tobias didn't answer immediately. He opened his laptop, found the old article about Marcus Denton, the student expelled under similar accusations, now teaching math in a forgotten school across the state. He opened his voice memo, pulled the recording into an editing app, trimmed the excess. The clip was clear. Richard's voice. It's in everyone's best interest if the narrative disappears. Cynthia's follow-up. Movements fade. Legacies last. He uploaded the file to a cloud drive. Drafted a caption. When the truth threatens power, power offers money. I didn't take the deal. Then he tagged Avery Cole, the civil rights attorney who had once defended Marcus. A long shot. But this time, Tobias wasn't aiming to win. He was aiming to He hovered over the post button.
And pressed.
Within minutes, it spread like oxygen near fire. The clip trended within an hour. Journalists confirmed the voices. Law professors weighed in. Harvard's silence snapped, and Tobias sat there still, watching it all unfold. He hadn't taken their money. He gave them proof instead. He uploads the recording anonymously and tags a civil rights lawyer. By the end of the week, the storm Tobias had tried so long to weather silently had become something else, a movement. Not because he spoke, but because he had proof. The leaked recording shook the internet, but it shattered Harvard. Alumni tried to distance themselves. Faculty circulated open letters demanding accountability, and student-led protests doubled in size. What began as whispers in hallways was now front-page news. Every headline said it differently, but they all said the same thing. Harvard whistleblower, exposes institutional racism, university in crisis, bribery allegations rock Ivy League, black math prodigy, ignites civil rights firestorm. Tobias received interview requests from every major outlet. CNN, NPR, The Guardian, Oprah's team called. The New York Times wanted a profile. He answered none of them. Even as his name rose across hashtags in national television, he said nothing publicly. No tweet, no statement, just stillness. His silence wasn't fear. It was focus. Because Tobias wasn't preparing for a press tour. He was preparing for court. The civil rights attorney he had tagged, Avery Cole, had responded within hours of the post. Not with fanfare, but with precision. A single message. I believe you. Let's move. Within days, a formal civil suit was filed in federal court. Tobias Kinley, V.D., the president and fellows of Harvard College. Allegations included racial discrimination, institutional retaliation, and coercion to suppress speech. The suit also named individuals, faculty, administrators, and alumni. The response from the university was swift and defensive. Their official statement cited deep concern over the recordings, but denied any wrongdoing. We will fully cooperate with all investigations, it read, but the language was careful. They offered empathy, not responsibility. The internet, however, was not as cautious. Clips of Tobias solving the math problem played on repeat, side by sides with the hate note. Photos of his mother standing outside their vandalized home, defiantly, became viral symbols of generational strength. Tobias watched none of it. He spent his days in legal prep, reviewing transcripts, organizing timelines, meeting with Cole's team. The media screamed louder by the day, but he stayed grounded in evidence. His case wasn't just about what was done to him. It was about how power protects itself, and how one student refused to shrink under it. The day of the hearing arrived in late March, sunlight bouncing cold off courthouse windows. Protesters gathered outside, media vans parked in long rows, and students stood shoulder to shoulder, holding signs. This is bigger than Harvard. Believe Black brilliance. He solved their problem, then became one. Inside, Tobias sat calmly at the plaintiff's table, wearing a simple black suit, no labels, no flash, just clarity. Opposite him sat a row of university lawyers, cold and composed, led by a high-profile Boston attorney, whose specialty was reputation management. Judge Renata Shields presided, a black woman known for her firm control and intolerance for theatrics. Her presence alone shifted the balance in ways Harvard hadn't expected. The court proceedings began with introductions and timelines. The defense tried to downplay the recordings, claiming contextual misunderstanding, and suggesting that no official policies were violated. They argued that Harvard had never disciplined Tobias formally, and that his experience was regrettable, but not unlawful. Then Cole stood. Her voice was quiet, but each word struck like a blade. Regret, she said, is an illegal defense, and racism doesn't always scream. Sometimes, it whispers. Sometimes, it smiles. But it always protects itself. She outlined every step. The fake accusation, the silence from faculty, the attempt to buy his silence, the leaked recording. The courtroom listened, frozen. Then came the evidence. The audio, the emails, the disciplinary notice, Tobias's timeline, the hate note, and then, the witnesses. First Jordan, who testified about the early days, the pressure, the threats. Then Maya, who explained how Tobias was quietly pushed out of projects. Finally, Tobias himself took the stand. The courtroom held its breath. He answered questions clearly, without embellishment. No dramatics, no tears, just facts. I didn't come to Harvard to fight, he said. I came to learn. He recounted the math problem, the first day, the silence after solving it, and the first time he realized he was being framed as a threat. Then, the defense attorney stood. She approached slowly. One question, Mr. Kinley, she said, voice smooth. Why didn't you just stay quiet and finish your degree? The courtroom went still. No one moved. No one blinked. Tobias looked up, not at her, but at the judge. Then at the gallery, filled with students, reporters and strangers holding hope. And finally, at the jury. On the stand he's asked one question. Why didn't you just stay quiet and finish your degree? The question echoed in the courtroom long after it was asked. Why didn't you just stay quiet and finish your degree? It hadn't been posed with malice. It was delivered like logic, like common sense. But that's what made it worse. It was the kind of question that sounded neutral, unless you'd lived inside it. It was the kind of question that always followed the exceptional, especially if they were black. Tobias sat still, his hands folded on the wooden witness stand, a single sheet of notes untouched in front of him. He didn't need them. He looked directly at the jurors. Then he spoke. I didn't stay quiet because the silence was never mine to begin with. His voice wasn't loud. It was steady, almost soft, but it carried. When I walked into that lecture hall and solved the problem, the first thing I felt wasn't pride. It was fear, because I saw it in their eyes. I saw what it meant to be too good, in a space that didn't expect me to be anything at all. Murmurs stirred in the gallery, but the judge didn't gavel. She leaned forward instead. Tobias continued. Harvard didn't ask me to shrink. It assumed I already would, and when I didn't, when I did something undeniably brilliant, they didn't celebrate it. They erased it. Literally. They wiped it off the board. He paused. Then they tried to wipe me out too. One of the jurors, a middle-aged black woman, blinked hard. Another, a young man in a navy blazer, shifted uncomfortably. They didn't say the word race. That's not how it works in places like this. It's more subtle. It's policy, procedure, fit, tone, aggressive posture. It's the language of control, made to sound polite. He leaned forward. They told me to step back, that I should consider leaving, for my own well-being, but they never said that to the ones who lied about me, who left notes under my door, who vandalized my home. They were never offered transitional resources. The courtroom was now silent. I didn't stay quiet, Tobias said, because staying quiet means they win. And it tells the next black kid with a notebook full of unsolvable problems that he should keep his head down, be grateful, and never solve too much. Avery Cole sat at the plaintiff's table, unmoving, her hand resting lightly over her legal pad. The Harvard legal team scribbled furiously, glancing toward the judge. Tobias inhaled deeply. I stayed because I earned my seat. And I spoke because every system designed to exclude us depends on our silence to survive. He looked at the jury one last time. So, no, I didn't stay quiet. And I won't. There was no applause, just a stillness too thick for words. Judge Shields finally spoke. Mr. Kinley. Thank you. Tobias stepped down, his shoes quiet against the polished wood. As he returned to his seat, reporters in the back tapped urgently at their keyboards. The court's sketch artist looked overwhelmed, trying to capture what had just happened. The next day, the transcript of Tobias's statement hit the internet. By noon, it had gone viral. Clips surfaced from the courtroom audio, layered over footage of protests, news headlines, and that now legendary photo of Tobias standing in front of the Harvard lecture board. The caption read, "He didn't yell. He didn't fight. He spoke." And the world listened. Within 48 hours, the video had 23 million views. Civil rights groups reposted it. Celebrities quoted it. Teachers played it in classrooms. A senator referenced it during a national education hearing. If our institutions punish genius when it's black, they don't need reform. They need a reckoning. Harvard's silence grew more damning by the hour. The university's legal team filed a last-minute motion to suppress further audio. It was denied. Social media exploded. I won't stay quiet. Tobias testifies. Erase the erasure. But inside the courthouse, it wasn't noise that shifted the outcome. It was presence. It was truth. By the final day of the trial, the gallery was full. Former students, journalists, strangers, families with children, who wanted to see what courage looked like. Judge Shields returned to the bench with a sealed document in her hand. She addressed the room calmly. This court has reviewed the evidence, the testimony, and the procedural history surrounding this case. The treatment of Mr. Tobias Kinley cannot be separated from broader institutional patterns. Patterns this court finds troubling and persistent. Harvard's lawyers straightened, prepared to push back, but the judge wasn't finished. In addition to awarding judgment in favor of the plaintiff, this court is formally recommending a federal inquiry into the university's discrimination practices, disciplinary processes, and internal accountability frameworks. Gasps. Not just a ruling, a federal review. It was bigger than Tobias's name now. It was systemic. Tobias closed his eyes as the weight of those words settled. Not in victory, but in release. For the first time in months, he felt something like breathing. The court adjourned. The media swarm began. A reporter tried to shove a mic into his face. He stepped past her. He didn't need to say anything. He already had. The judge rules, not just in Tobias's favor, but for federal inquiry into Harvard's racial policies. The courthouse was still echoing with noise when Tobias stepped outside. Applause. Cameras flashing. Protesters cheering. Microphones thrust toward him. His name shouted like a chant. But inside, Tobias felt none of it. Victory, it turned out, was loud on the outside, and hollow on the inside. He didn't speak to the press. He didn't lift a fist or smile for the cameras. He followed his lawyer through the chaos, got into a waiting car, and shut the door. Only then did the silence return. Back in Chicago, the house looked mostly the same. The broken window had been repaired, and the new security lights blinked steadily through the night. But his mother's eyes carried shadows now. Fear didn't leave with the bricks. It lingered. Their first dinner back together was quiet. No celebration, just exhaustion that sat at the table with them. "You won," she said gently, as she passed him a bowl of greens. "But you shouldn't have had to fight." Tobias nodded. He knew she was right. Justice had come, but it didn't come clean. The days that followed were a whirlwind of headlines and requests, documentaries, interviews, university panels, endorsement offers, speaking tours. He turned down almost all of them. Some said he was wasting his moment. Others accused him of hiding. But Tobias knew better. He wasn't hiding, he was healing. For the first time in months, there was no equation to solve, no hearing to prepare for, no statement to write, just long, quiet mornings by the window, afternoon walks along the lake, nights where the silence wasn't hostile, it was restful. He told Harvard he wouldn't be returning that semester. Not because they pushed him out, because he needed space to breathe. He visited his old high school, where teachers greeted him like a hometown hero. In the hallway, students pointed. "That's him," they whispered, "the Harvard kid." But when he stepped into a math classroom and faced a group of wide-eyed juniors, he didn't talk about Harvard. He talked about hope. Being brilliant shouldn't require permission, he told them. It should be expected. Back at home, he pulled out his old notebook, the one that had once held the unsolvable equation. He didn't fill it with math this time. He filled it with reflections, lessons, poems, names of kids he met in classrooms who reminded him of himself. He started tutoring a group of local 8th graders in algebra every Saturday, quietly, without cameras. The silence, once a cage, had become a choice. One evening, as the sun slipped behind the city skyline, an email arrived. The subject line made him sit up straight. Fellowship offer, National Research Institute for Theoretical Mathematics. He opened it. Inside was a brief but powerful letter. "Mr. Kinley, we followed your story. We regret how your brilliance was received. If you're ready to return to research, our doors are open. Full academic support, housing, travel, and most importantly, no silence." Attached is our public letter of apology, signed by our faculty. Tobias read it again. Then again. He forwarded it to his mother. All he wrote was, "They finally see the math, not the color." That night he stood on the balcony of their apartment, overlooking the quiet hum of the city. No microphone, no hashtags, just breath and stars. His phone buzzed once more. A new notification. Harvard. A Harvard official. "We are committed to institutional reform. Thank you, A. Tobias Kinley, for the courage to help us grow." He didn't like the post. He didn't reply. He set the phone face down. Peace, he had learned, doesn't need a platform. Then his inbox pinged again. Subject line. "Full ride offer. National Research Institute. With our public apology." A top research institute offers him a full ride and a public apology. 1 year later, Harvard looked the same. Red brick, sharp edges, old silence. But Tobias Kinley wasn't the same boy who had once walked into Jefferson Hall with a notebook in quiet brilliance. He came back taller in posture, heavier in presence, and armed not just with equations, but with a vision. He stepped onto campus in early fall, the leaves just beginning to change, the courtyard buzzing with new students. This time no one whispered when he passed. Some looked away, some nodded, some stared too long, unsure whether to admire or apologize. He wore no university gear, just a black jacket and the same clean sneakers from his first semester. But in his hands he carried something no protest could erase. Influence. The university hadn't forgotten. After the court ruling, the federal inquiry had begun, Policies were pulled apart. Internal emails leaked. Diversity departments that once handed out brochures were now under review. 2 senior deans quietly resigned. A task force was formed, and for once it included students like Tobias. But his return wasn't about cleaning up Harvard's mess. It was about building something that wouldn't require cleanup. He launched the Kinley Foundation for Black Scholars in elite institutions 2 weeks after stepping back onto campus. A national initiative focused on mentorship, funding, and institutional accountability. The mission wasn't diversity, it was permanent. "We don't want seats at the table," Tobias said during the first press event. "We want to build new tables and teach others how to carry their own." Donors reached out quickly. Not for PR, for purpose. Within months, the foundation funded scholarships at 6 top-tier universities. Harvard wasn't the focus. It was the origin story. In classrooms, change came faster than expected. Professors who once avoided eye contact now quoted his court testimony. Guest lectures included his case in their syllabi. One student group hosted a forum titled, "From Threat to Theory, the Tobias Kinley Framework on Brilliance and Bias." He didn't attend. Instead, he taught a free weekend workshop at a community college across town. The students who once doubted him avoided him now, not out of shame, but out of fear that their past words might echo. One even tried to apologize at a student mixer. "I was ignorant," the student muttered. "I just didn't get it." Tobias nodded once. Not out of forgiveness. Out of closure. The real change wasn't in apologies. It was in policies. Harvard rewrote its code of conduct, embedding language about systemic bias and microaggressions. The Office of Disciplinary Review added a student oversight panel, the first of its kind. Tobias wasn't on it. He didn't need a title to lead. Every Wednesday evening, he hosted an open circle at the science library. No flyers, no emails, just word of mouth. It became known as Kinley Hour. Black students, freshmen, seniors, grad students, came with notebooks and questions and wounds. Some came just to sit, to be near someone who had refused to disappear. He never lectured. He listened. And when he did speak, it wasn't about Harvard. It was about survival with your dignity intact. "You don't owe them silence," he said once, "but you do owe yourself peace." Administrators attended the circles too. Quietly, humbly, learning what years of faculty training had failed to teach. By spring, Tobias had quietly rejoined the math program. He didn't take advanced placement or early graduation. He moved at his own pace. One day, walking through the hallway outside the lecture rooms, he paused at a corkboard filled with faculty postings. Among the flyers was a sheet of paper with a handwritten note. "Looking for co-author. Seeking young theorist for joint research on recursive logic. Dr. Marrow." Tobias blinked. Later that afternoon, he opened his inbox. The message was there. Subject: collaboration opportunity. From Nan Marrow, the Harvard. "Tobias, I've been following your work through the foundation. Your approach to logic compression is extraordinary. I'd be honored to collaborate on a new paper. Let me know if you'd be open." Dr. Marrow, the same professor who once erased his solution. The same man who'd presided silently over his first disciplinary hearing. Tobias stared at the screen for a long time. He didn't feel anger. He felt something stranger. Distance. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't redemption. It was proof. The boy they tried to bury had returned. Not for validation, but for legacy. He didn't reply to the email. Not yet. He had an idea forming. The same professor who first doubted him sends him an email asking to co-author a paper. Commencement morning came like a slow exhale. The sky above Harvard Yard was a soft, endless gray. The kind of sky that didn't want attention. It just wanted to hold space. Chairs lined the lawn. Cameras were stationed behind velvet ropes. The podium stood in front of the historic Widener Library, polished and waiting. And Tobias Kinley, wearing the deep crimson gown of Harvard's graduating class, stood behind that podium, not as a footnote, not as a controversy, but as the keynote speaker. He had debated turning down the honor. The offer came from the new university president, who had inherited a scarred institution and was trying tentatively to stitch its wounds. Tobias didn't care about optics or forgiveness, but the stage wasn't for him. It was for every student who had been told brilliance looked like someone else. He looked out across the sea of gowns, black mortarboards bouncing slightly in the breeze. His mother was near the front, clutching tissues she swore she wouldn't need. Jordan sat beside her, wearing a Kinley Foundation pin on his lapel. The speech had no title. It didn't need one. When I first walked into this campus, Tobias began, I didn't know that solving a problem could start one. The crowd laughed softly, nervously. He let it settle. That moment, 60 seconds at a chalkboard, wasn't magic. It wasn't rebellion. It was preparation meeting permission. He paused. And the truth is, most students like me never get either. The silence sharpened. I was told I didn't belong, that my voice was too loud, my confidence too much, that my presence felt like disruption, but I stayed, not because I was fearless, but because I was tired of shrinking. He glanced at the crowd, then directly into the lens of the live stream camera. If you're in a room where your brilliance feels like a threat, don't lower your voice. Don't dim your math, your theory, your poetry, because those rooms were never sacred. They were just used to being unchallenged. Behind him, the crimson Harvard banner fluttered slightly, a symbol, no longer untouchable. He finished with one line. I solved one problem, but I exposed a century. The applause came in waves, not explosive, just real. Afterward, he shook hands with faculty, posed for photos, and accepted his diploma with the quiet strength of someone who had already earned it long before. No one from the administration mentioned the lawsuit. Harvard never publicly apologized. Not direct, but the changes were visible. Bias reporting structures were now mandatory. Faculty training had tripled. Disciplinary panels were co-chaired with students, and the Office of Black Student Affairs had its own building, named after Dr. Marcus Denton, whose story Tobias had once uncovered. Tobias's name was now part of 3 courses: ethics in modern academia, mathematical genius and social bias, race, power, and the elite classroom. He didn't teach them, but students studied him, not as a martyr, as a disruptor. His foundation had expanded to 18 universities and partnered with national STEM programs. He spent the summer after graduation speaking to educators, not about policy, but about harm, how it hides in grading curves and group projects, in who gets a second chance and who gets labeled difficult. But amid all the speeches, all the awards, all the grants and interviews and headlines, Tobias remained unchanged where it mattered most. He still returned home every Sunday, still ran by the lake, still replied to every student who emailed him asking, "How did you keep going?" and still refused to let Harvard define him. That fall, on a quiet Thursday, his mother called him, not in panic this time, but in awe. He answered quickly, "Ma." Her voice cracked, this time with joy. "It's here, baby." Her letter, from Harvard. Tobias stood completely still. On the other end of the line, his younger sister was screaming. "She got in," his mother said, laughing now. "She got in." He didn't say anything for a moment, just let it land. The same campus that tried to bury him would now receive her, not as an experiment, but as legacy. But she wouldn't be walking in like he did. She'd be walking in with her name already echoing. Because of a 60-second miracle. Because of a boy who picked up a marker, rewrote history, and dared to finish the problem, even when they tried to erase him. His younger sister receives an acceptance letter from Harvard. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been told you don't belong, just because of who you are, then you know why stories like Tobias's matter. Because silence protects injustice. But truth, it breaks it. Type yes if you believe brilliance needs no permission. Subscribe if this story broke your heart and opened your eyes.